Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Barbara, Vice Dean of International Affairs at UFMG, and I am pleased to be here today with my colleagues, Professor Mauro, and our guest speaker, Professor Ana Paula. This year marks 10 years of Quotas Law in Brazil, and I think it is extremely important that we have this opportunity to hear what Professor Paula has been studying this theme for quite a long time, and I think it's really important that we explore this further and understand this initiative that has reshaped our universities. I will hand over to Professor Mauro, who coordinates our minor in international affairs, to mediate this talk. Thank you, Mauro and Ana.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. It's a pleasure for us in the minor of international affairs, UFMG, to receive and to join with us this evening for this discussion that is very relevant for our university and for the world also. I'd like to thank Professor Ana Paula Karruz from the Department of Political Science from our university for sharing her knowledge and discussing this issue with us and with our academic community today. Professor Ana Paula is tenured faculty from the Department of Political Science. She has a bachelor degree in economics from the University of São Paulo, a master's degree in public administration and government from Fundação Getúlio Vargas. And she has also a PhD in public policy and administration from the George Washington University. So Ana Paula, for us, it's a pleasure. Thank you for your time and for all your for receiving our kind invitation for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I will start by sharing my screen. So I am Ana Karruz from the Department of Political Science. I should start by thanking Professor Barbara, and Professor Mauro for the invitation. It's an enormous pleasure to talk about a topic that I believe is so relevant for the development of our country and is dear to my heart. I would also like to thank my research assistants, Shirley and Isabella, that helped me in the crafting of this presentation. I should say that I have not explored the topic of affirmative action from an international perspective. So all the thoughts and evaluations that I will share today.
Sorry, but we had a technical problem. I believe that Professor Ana got disconnected. She'll be with us soon, all right?
I'm back after blackout in my neighborhood. I'm so sorry.
That's okay, no worries. You can continue from where you stopped. Thank you so much.
So let me tell you a little bit about the structure of the presentation. I start with some facts on access to higher education in Brazil, and then I discuss features of the. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
Ana.
Let me try to share my screen again. I'm using my cell phone as a router. I don't know how reliable that will be, but let's try. So I brought some facts from an article by Carvalhais, Sienkiewicz, and Ribeiro, where the authors analyze data from ENEM, our main college entrance test in Brazil. So the plot is a box plot and shows the distribution of ENEM scores in different income brackets. It also shows within each income bracket distribution of scores by racial belonging. We see that even among examinees, which are a selected group of high school graduates, racial differences in academic readiness cannot be explained solely by differences in income. In each income bracket, we see that whites tend to score higher than non-whites. And that's why historical injustices disfavor non-whites in our country. Next, I'll show some data from IBGE, which is Brazil's Census Bureau. So, an analysis from IBGE reveals that the percentage of Black and Brown youth that attended college or have completed college is half that of the whites. Not surprisingly, after hearing what we just said, Blacks and Browns are severely underrepresented among college graduates in the country. Participation of Blacks and Browns among college graduates is 22 percentage points lower than their participation in the other population. Now, let's talk about the Quotas Law, how it works, and how it compares to other affirmative action that preceded it. First, the Quotas Law established quotas, right? And quotas are a type of affirmative action. As a type of affirmative action, it calls for an understanding of what affirmative action is. So I will read a definition of affirmative action by Daniel Sabag. As a general matter, affirmative action is a set of measures intended to influence the allocation of goods, such as admission to selective universities or professional schools, jobs, promotions, and public contracts, through a process that takes account of individual membership in designated groups. The goal is to increase the proportion of members of those groups in the population under consideration where they are currently underrepresented, in part as a result of past oppression by state authorities and/or present societal discrimination. I brought this content because I thought it would be important to have a definition of affirmative action for our discussion today. Let's now talk about the Quotas Law itself. The Quotas Law in 2012, from 2012, established a minimum affirmative action effort level for all federal universities and institutes, reaching 100 plus higher education institutions. It established a socio-economic and racial scheme of seat reservation. To illustrate how the Quotas Law works, I will use a fictitious example of a major that offers 100 seats. These 100 seats are split in 50 seats that will go to free competition, so non-reserved seats, and 50 seats that are reserved to public high school graduates. The seats reserved to public school graduates are further split into seats reserved to low-income applicants and applicants that do not claim that low-income condition. Then, as what we call sub-quotas, we have the race-based seats reservation. So within the seats reserved to low-income public high school graduates, we have seats that are designated to Black, Brown, and Indigenous applicants, and other part of seats that go to low-income public high school graduates who do not claim that racial condition. The same happens to the seats reserved to public high school graduates, but that do not require a low-income condition. At the end, we have 5 entry modalities, which I refer to as M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. M5 is pre-competition. M1 is the modality for Black, Brown, Indigenous, low-income public high school graduates. In 2016, the Quotas Law was amended, and after that, there have been established quotas for people with disability that work as sub-quotas within M1 to M4. But the Quotas Law was not the first affirmative action in the country. On the contrary, by the time the Quotas Law was enacted, 73% of public, be it federal or state universities, had already applied some kind of affirmative action. Most of the universities with affirmative action prior to the Quotas Law applied quotas as their type of affirmative action, followed by additional places, a bonus system. One thing I should emphasize about the quotas is that they are very different from the bonus system. The difference is that in the bonus system, the percentage of incoming students from target groups is determined a posteriori. While under the quotas, we have a minimum share of the target groups guaranteed by the quota, so determined a priori. Analysts have noticed that the bonus system, because it gives the same level of additional points, score points in the entrance test to all applicants, regardless of the competitiveness of the major they are applying for, tends to concentrate affirmative action beneficiaries in the less competitive majors. So the option for the quotas, the option that was taken by the time the Quotas Law was passed, allows for greater diversification of the student body, and that's seen as an advantage, as a positive quality of our legislation. Now we'll move to the impacts of the Quotas Law on selected student outcomes. I will start by talking about some of the features of the literature on affirmative action in higher education. I will borrow a systematic review of the literature that was conducted by the Consórcio de Acompanhamento de Ações Afirmativas, a research consortium that congregates several universities and has been very productive in the last few months. The consortium has conducted systematic review of the literature on affirmative action in Brazilian higher education. The review reviews that the vast majority of evaluations is favorable to such policies, to affirmative action in higher education. We see in the plot the distribution of studies, evaluations, according to the valence of the evaluations. So we see that be it affirmative action based on income or type of school, be it affirmative action that's based on racial criteria, all of them are very well evaluated in the literature. 62% positively assess income or type of school-based affirmative action, and an even higher approval was observed in the studies that analyzed race-based affirmative action. So a very positive overall evaluation of this type of this umbrella of affirmative actions. It's not specific to the Quotas Law, okay? It's the literature on affirmative action in general that's a very positive, very optimistic about the potential of these policies to produce better conditions and greater justice. I would like to say a few more words about this literature. First thing is that it's essentially a case-based literature. It's very rare that study groups get access to student-level data. Universities are very concerned about a potential misuse of personal data. So when a research group does have access, gets access to this type of data, usually what it can do is to write about that specific university. So producing a case-based literature. Other important characteristic of the literature is that the data, the student-level data, when available, is not necessarily comparable across universities because the curricular requirements and the structure of academic records vary across higher education institutions. In addition, each higher education institution can complement the Quotas Law with its own proprietary affirmative action, which makes the cross-university comparisons very tricky, basically non-existent. Yet, many of the published studies regard affirmative action that was practiced prior to the Quotas Law. And in conjunction with the other features I have mentioned, we have a multitude of case studies which, due to methodological or policy-based differences, do not dialogue easily. In this presentation, I will focus on the few nationally representative studies that are available. And we'll talk about UFMG when I don't find a nationally representative source. Okay, so our purpose is to talk about impacts of the Quotas Law on different student outcomes, on different outcome dimensions. We could think of several outcome dimensions where the Quotas Law could produce some change, ranging from aspirations to higher education, so regarding a public that is not yet in the university, that's perhaps in high school, and is considering applying to a public higher institution or not. But we also have outcomes that regard experiences once the student has been admitted. For instance, we have many studies on access that will look at the student body composition of the incoming classes and how they change it over time. We have also studies on performance, so grades in college, and completion, which include dropout as an outcome. And we have very few studies on labor market outcomes. Throughout the presentation, I represent these 4 outcome dimensions in this type of funnel. And I should mention that most of the evidence produced regards access, regards how student body composition has been affected by the Quotas Law. On the first outcome dimension, aspirations to higher education at federal institutions, I will report a research conducted by Catarina Mello and I, where we were interested in seeing whether high school seniors from Belo Horizonte metropolitan area, which is the main recruiting territory for UFMG, showed some change in their aspirations to pursue public higher education, and if those changes, if present, could be attributed to the Quotas Law. We found that among M1 eligible high school seniors, so students in public high schools with low income and declared as Blacks, Browns, or Indigenous, which we refer as PPI, our acronym for Pretos, Pardos, Indígenas. So we found that M1 eligible students showed an increase in aspiration to higher education of about 32% in 2015 in comparison to 2012. And that result is, as one would expect, given that seat reservation is given this seat reservation scheme that was created by the Quotas Law. This result indicates that the Quotas Law have increased interest, demand for public higher education among its target group, which is deemed to be a very positive result. Next, I will talk about access, admissions. I will borrow data from an article by Sienkiewicz and Melo. These authors examined incoming classes at federal universities and institutes in 2012 and years following the Quotas Law. They show that in 2012, the percentage of, but let me rephrase this. They found that public high school graduates made 52% of the income classes in 2012, and that percentage increased by 9 percentage points in 2016, which implies a percent variation of 16%, an increase of 16% in the participation of public high school graduates in the incoming classes of federal higher education institutions. The authors also analyzed how the participation of PPI, public high school graduates, changed over time. In 2012, it represented 28%, so 28% of the incoming classes were Black, Brown, Indigenous public high school graduates, while in 2016, that percentage was considerably higher, reaching 38%, which represents a 10 percentage point increase, but in percentage variation terms, we are talking about a 36% increase in the participation of PPI public high school graduates. And this is a very salient result. Sienkiewicz and Melo conclude that racial diversification is the main change caused by the Quotas Law. The same authors, Sienkiewicz and Melo, in other article, were interested in checking whether that increased participation of the target groups was concentrated in a few majors, or whether it was widespread in many majors. This chart shows participation of share of public high school graduates also in 2012 and 2016, but this time by major. The green circle refers to 2012, the blue one to 2016. The distance between the circles show the transformation in the student body composition. And we can see that participation of public school graduates in the incoming classes has risen in almost all majors, and no major has lost participation of such groups. Moreover, we see that the transformations were more pronounced in majors with lower initial inclusion, such as medicine and dentistry. A similar analysis was made regarding specifically Black, Brown, Indigenous public high school graduates. Here, the conclusions are similar. So this group proportionally showed an even greater increase in participation in the incoming classes. And that's true for all majors analyzed, which leads us to the overall conclusion that that pattern at the aggregate of majors is also reflected in the major by major analysis, showing that inclusion has reached all majors. We now move to performance and completion. First work I would like to share is one by Santos, Becker, and Oliveira that has just been published, where the authors analyze data from ENADE. ENADE is our college exit test, is administered centrally by the Ministry of Education. The authors analyzed 3 editions of ENADE, 2016 to 2018. They were specifically focusing on 2 groups of college seniors: quota Black, Brown, and Indigenous students, and non-quota Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. So these authors analyzed only PPE students, comparing quota and non-quota ones. Using econometric models with several types of matching techniques and fancy stuff, Santos, Becker, and Oliveira did not detect any difference in time to completion. Time to completion was very similar, about 5.3 years, regardless of the quota status. The authors, nevertheless, found a statistically significant difference in ENADE scores, though a very small one, a 0.74 lower score for race-based quota students as opposed to non-quota students on a scale of 0 to 100. So according to Santos, Becker, and Oliveira, quota status does not seem to affect academic performance at exit tests in a material way. And the difference that has been detected is very small, not enough to be considered important material. I'm going now to talk about another aspect of the experience at college that has to do with dropping. Dropping out, we should emphasize, is not necessarily a negative experience, although we tend to perceive it as a bad result, a failure. Some theorists in the field of education have noticed that changing majors can be a positive, a improvement, a better choice for students that for one reason or other are not, do not feel they are a good match for the major they currently attend. I have here a quote from Tinto that says, "The simple act of leaving a university can have multiple and completely different meanings. Although an observer, such as a university official, can define dropout as a failure to complete a program of study, students may interpret their abandonment as a positive step towards the achievement of a goal." So if changing majors promotes a better match between the students' preferences and that of their major, the current major and institution, then dropping out may be a positive experience. Therefore, when we are looking at dropout rates, we should consider not only the dropping out of a major, but also dropping out of a higher education system, which is a more worrisome result, is a more worrisome condition when the student drops out of a major and does not return to the higher education system. On dropping out, I'm going to report results from a PhD dissertation by Gustavo Bruno de Paula from UFMG. So Gustavo assessed data from the 2016 and 2017 higher education censuses to check whether quota students dropped out more than non-quota students. He estimated several fancy models, logit models with a set of controls, considering only students from federal universities, and found that dropout rates are virtually the same among quota and non-quota students. In the left panel, we see dropout from major or dropout from institution. And the logit model shows that quota status associates with a slightly increased probability of dropping out the major institution, a increase of about 1 percentage point, so a very small variation in the probability of dropping out. Gustavo Paula also analyzed dropping out from the higher education system. And here, he didn't find any difference between quota and non-quota students. Quota students, the quota status does not affect the probability of dropping out of the higher education system. The general message then is that if there are any differences in dropout between quota and non-quota students, they are really, really small. Again, not material, or don't seem to be a worry, don't seem to be worrisome. I'm moving now to the fourth and last segment of the presentation, where I will list some of the proposed adjustments to the Quotas Law. Those adjustments have been proposed by several analysts in the field, and I selected those proposals that were the most recurrent in the literature. I will start by proposals dealing with aspirations to higher education, so following the funnel. The recommendation is that we should try to increase awareness of the Quotas Law among the target audience, i.e. public high school students. And the rationale for that is that there is a perceived lack of knowledge about the affirmative actions, and that this lack of knowledge may lead students to self-exclude themselves from NA, not even trying NA, because certain groups of students, which are quota law target groups, may not see themselves as competitive candidates to public higher education, and giving that gloomy perspective, don't even try. So the recommendation is to increase awareness of the quotas law, how it works, what are the options to be admitted, what are student aid programs that most vulnerable applicants could rely on. Now, moving to proposals dealing with access, the second stage in our funnel, we have identified two recurrent recommendations. The first one is to adjust CISU, our centralized applications platform, to allow quota applicants to compete for to compete for free competition slots as well. Nowadays, applicants that are trying to enter higher education through CISU, they have to select one modality to be considered. So if you select M1, you will not be considered for M5. And that is the same for any other type of reserve, for reserve modality. The rationale for changing CISU is that a quota-eligible applicant, if he scores high enough to be admitted via free competition, he or she should not take a reserved seat. Right? Reserved seats should be dedicated to target group applicants who could not enter university through free competition. That's the spirit of the Quotas Law and the affirmative action in access to higher education. A second recommendation is to strengthen and regulate racial confirmation committees, the so-called comissões de heteroidentificação. The rationale is that in response to cases of fraud, many federal universities have created such committees. However, every university created its own with its own rules, so that clear and centralized protocols regarding what features should be considered in the racial confirmation are lacking. We are lacking clear centralized protocols for that highly sensitive task of confirming racial belonging. As far as performance and completion, we have also two recommendations. The first one is to guarantee access of quota students to student aid, e.g. subsidized housing, fellowships, subsidized meals. And the rationale is quite obvious. Many quota students lack material conditions to attend college, so that in the absence of student aid, college may not be viable for them. Staying in college may not be viable. And with that, you can cause the dropping out of a considerable number of quota students, or perhaps they will stay in college, but take longer to graduate and make greater sacrifices to attend college. So the recommendation is to strengthen student aid in all its forms. A second recommendation regarding performance and completion is to guarantee access of quota students to supplemental learning support, especially in the exact sciences and technology majors. Some case studies revealed that Black, Brown, and Indigenous quota students tend to grade a little lower and to drop out more in the exact sciences and technology majors. The hypothesis is that the entry courses like calculus pose greater difficulties for these groups, given the inequalities in our basic public education, so that it should be called for special pedagogical, special learning support to quota students. Now, close to wrapping up, I would like to share two more recommendations. These are overall recommendations regarding the Quotas Law and are really recurrent in the literature as a consensus. The first one is that the Quotas Law must be continued. The rationale being that there is still a long fight ahead of us against educational inequalities and races. So we need to invest more in affirmative action for time being. And the second overall recommendation is that social and racial equity must be a permanent agenda in all other fields of higher education, not only in undergraduate programs, but also in the postgraduate programs, in research projects, faculty recruiting, etc. With that, I finished the presentation. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I'll be happy to address questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you so much. Your talk was really interesting and very new. I wasn't aware of some issues and some points of the Quotas Law, and now it's more evident for me. I don't know if Mauro would like to say something or to start the discussion before we open for questions, or if something pops up here in our chat. Go ahead, Mauro.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. And of course, thank you, Ana, so much for sharing with us this knowledge, this data. The data is quite interesting. Probably it goes against a lot of common sense observation of the very beginning of quota law 10 years ago. So I think all public policies should be evaluated, and the data that you have shown and you have research are quite interesting and shows a place for go in the future. And your last slides, they are very provocative for increasing and diminish the racism and the inequalities in higher education. For me, it's very interesting to show, for example, health science, that's my area, where the inclusion, it's less evident. And when I entered, for example, today, I entered in the university in 2008. It's completely different from today. When I enter in my building, faculty of School of Dentistry or Faculty of Dentistry, I realized that we have a completely different students that we have 14 years ago, and 14 years for history is so short, such a short time. So we changed a lot in our university. Of course, we should change more. And 500 years of inequalities. It's not a simple task to change in 10 years, but I think we have now a field for going. We have some strategies for changing more than we have also changed, and we overcome the common sense of the very beginning. And especially in our university, I think we are doing a very good job in this topic. So it's very interesting for us having this talk. And I'm talking a lot because I'm waiting for the students and for everyone that are watching our presentation today.
Can I start and ask a question or make a comment? It's like a comment and a question. I think Ana can choose the best way to approach it. Ana, I was always intrigued by some demonstration of resistance against Quotas Law from different sectors of our society. Could you comment a little bit about this resistance? What do you think is the misunderstanding, or if there is any misunderstanding, the role of the media on that? Have you noticed something? Have you, during your research, explored some of those issues? And if you could tell us a little bit what you think about that.
Since I believe we have a few extra minutes, I would like to share 2 more slides that I think are super interesting and probably will go with your comments, Professora Barbara. Just 1 second that I will share the screen. So at the beginning of the first affirmative actions, which happened early in the 2000s, and after that, right by the time where the Quotas Law was passed, there was really a lot of discussion regarding the merit of affirmative action, and a great concern that by reserving seats or conceding bonus points, a group of students that would not be a qualifier to access higher education could hurt excellence, especially in the most selective institutions. So that was a concern, and as you mentioned, Professora Barbara, it was very much present at the press debate. Now we have data that will tranquilize most of those worried analysts of the time. This is an analysis that I conducted with Flora Maia, and that has been published in a series of articles on Nexo Políticas Públicas. I recommend that everyone interested in affirmative action and quotas should access that series of, it's open, you don't have to subscribe Nexo to read it. It's a very rich series of short articles, one of them being about performance of quota and non-quota students at UFMG. This first chart shows scores at NA, our entrance test, and it reveals a substantial difference in NA scores among UFMG incoming students we see that scores vary by modality of entry, by admission modality. We see that the reddish curve, which plots scores of INA scores of UFMG students that entered through M1. So these are public high school graduates that are low income and declared to be Black, brown, or indigenous. We see that the reddish curve is at the left of the other curves. We also see that the purple curve, which shows INA scores of free competition students, is to the right of the other curves, meaning that quota students tend to score lower on INA than non-quota students. That should not be a surprise, because if we didn't have a systematic difference in scores, in entry test scores, it would be hard to justify quotas or affirmative action in access. So it's a condition that shows the different educational trajectories of the target groups in our society. However, those initial differences in academic preparedness are not reproduced once the students are in college, once they have entered UFMG. We see that by looking at the curves of NSG. NSG is our nota semestral global. It's a type of GPA that is calculated on a 0 to 100 scale. We see that the NSG distributions overlap much differently than what we see on the INA distributions, meaning that somehow quota students are catching up. They are somehow winning over that lack of academic readiness that they had when they arrived at UFMG. As a result, the average NSG among M1 students is 75, which is only 4 points lower than the NSG of free competition students. Again, on that 1 to 100 scale. So seems to me a very small difference. We did find, though, that in the science and technology majors, grades vary more by quota or non-quota status. In science technology majors, NSG in general is lower. The NSG for free competition students is 74, whereas the NSG for M1 students is 65, so a 9-point difference. And well, that calls for attention on the science technology majors, especially those that are math-based and that could impose greater barriers, greater difficulties writing the first courses, and could cause this difference in grades. That's the hypothesis. I have not explored grades at the course level, but everywhere you go, you hear about how calculus makes or breaks many of our students' expectations, and how it can be a really complicated phase in their undergraduate trajectory. But having said that, the overall message is that the quota students perform much better at college than one would expect based on their INA scores. So quota students with the same INA score of non-quota students tend to achieve better grades once at UFMG. And that's, again, seems to me a very positive, a hopeful result that indicates that if our youth had had access to better quality public high school education, or even elementary, all their trajectory in public high schools, if that experience had been more enriching, more fulfilling, perhaps those students would access UFMG with very competitive grades, not even requiring the quotas. That's another discussion, but the point is that quota students outperform their peers. And going back to your comment, this result for me is a tranquilizer, as I said. It shows that those concerns about a diffusion or some sort of compromise in academic excellence was not warranted.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. There is a comment here from Livia, which I think is relevant because she mentions ENEM as a test. You know, it somehow can be disputable because it's a test for university access, and the data that you are reporting, you know, it is based on different kinds of assessment. Would you like to comment on that?
I'm not completely sure that I caught the point. I believe it has to do with how unfair it is to use solely ENEM as a admissions criteria when students come from a variety of educational experiences. Some of them have been training for ENEM for a few years when they take the exam, and others not. Yeah, I understand that point. It could be also argued that there is some sort of epistemological imposition when you select one exam and applies to everyone. But there is a counter argument to that, which is it is easier and cheaper to take ENEM than taking several vestibulares, as we had in previous decades, when the students had to travel to the country to apply to different universities. And I believe that at the end, the previous system that didn't have a centralized platform as SISU, nor did it have a unified entrance test. I think that system was even worse. I believe that we are better off today because it became more affordable to apply to college. In that sense, ENEM is a good policy.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, just one more comment on your data. Do you have the opportunity for stratifying this analysis for early years and more recent years inside, for example, our university? And for example, we have some differences in the performance of these M groups. For example, in exact science, you have the opportunity for stratifying this data, for example, from 2012 to 2008, and 2008 to 2016, for example, for identifying some difference in these differences. between these 2 periods or 3 periods between these 10 years?
Professor Mauro, I don't have descriptive charts by year of entry, but I should say that those numbers I mentioned in the last slide, that on average the difference between N5 and N1 NSGs was 4 points in the aggregate of majors and 9 points in science and technology majors. Those 4 and 9 points that I reported, they were calculated through econometric models that controlled for major, for year of admission, for whether the student entered in the first or second semester, and whether that NSG regarded first, second, third, and fourth semesters periods in the program. So I don't have the numbers by year of entry, but I should say that those 4 and 5 point differences, they were calculated through models that control for all a large set of attributes that we should, consider differentiating across time and also across majors.
Oh, wonderful. I just was wondering if in more recent years we have less difference, for example, in exact science, but if you have controlled in your logistic model, it's perfect. Thank you.
But it's something I should prepare for other presentations. Thank you for the tip.
Barbara, I think your sound is off.
Sorry. I was just asking if the audience, if they have any questions, and if they want to write in Portuguese, feel free to do so, and we will tell here to Professor Ana. Checking the YouTube here as well.
I think our audience is a little bit shy today.
Yeah, I think so as well. I will just, I will explore on a little bit, and I will ask you, because all the time when we mention about Quotas Law, and when we talk about this profile, this group of students, there is a concern about maintaining, not only access, but also what are the policies that we should have in place to guarantee that they will continue their studies. Have you crisscrossed some of your data about the initiatives that are in place in our universities to guarantee that these students will have good performance and they will be able to conclude their studies as well?
So my analysis were based on student records, data from the RCA. And unfortunately, that data source does not include information regarding student assistant. Is this person a FUMP-assisted student? Nor it informs about whether the student has participated in other academic activities like iniciação científica, and if has been a teaching assistant, a monitor. We don't see much about the experience beyond grades and courses taking. So that's certainly lacking, and is a concern. It's a major concern among analysts of the Quotas Law. all of them point out that a greater investment in student aid has to be made. You see on the papers, reports of students in very selective institutions that are having great difficulties attending college, affording transportation and food. So this is a visible concern. My perception, which is a perception, not something I have found in systematic analysis, is that at UFMG, we offer several types of support. We have escutas acadêmicas, we have several teaching assistant fellowships, including fellowships that are reserved to FUNC-assisted and quota students. We have a great investment from Prograde on pedagogical development, integração docente, and several events that go in that direction. Perhaps we now have to mature those initiatives, make them more visible to the whole community, and perhaps more integrated. Again, that's a perception of mine. It's not something I have studied or have had access to, but I believe that would be an important, both an important research agenda, but also an agenda for a university administration.
Thank you, Ana.
So I think we are very lucky this night with your presentation and with your data and with your reflections about and all your analysis on this Quotas Law. I think this topic could come again for our discussion in minor international affairs, international studies, and in all minors that we have at the UFMG this year, we are discussing Quotas Law. So name of our minor international studies, I'd like to thank you again. And said that we are very happy having you here.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you. I'd like to also thanks the Dean for International Affairs, our Office of International Affairs at UFMG, Professor Aziz Saliba, Professor Barbara, and all the technical support that we have from the Office of International Affairs in our minor international studies. Thank you all so much, and thank everyone that joined us this evening for your presentation.
It has been my pleasure, Professor Mauro, Professora Bárbara. I'm at your disposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ana. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mauro. Thank you, Ricardo, and all the team from our international office, the Formação Transversal as well, and everybody involved in this initiative. We want to see you again, and we also to invite the community to participate more in our minor in international studies. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Bye-bye.